Welcome to this video on the topic of statistics. In this video, we're going to have a look at how we can represent continuous data in a visual manner. Now, continuous data may be represented graphically using a histogram. Histograms are similar to column graphs in that they show the frequency of represented items. However, there's a slight visual difference between a histogram and a column graph, which I'll get to later in the video. Now, histograms may be constructed by first organizing data into something called a class interval table. Now, the data we have represented over here are the heights of students within a class. The lowest height that we have in this class is 146 centimeters, and the tallest student we have in the class is roughly 185 centimeters by inspection. What we're going to do is we're going to represent this data graphically using a histogram, but before we can do that, we first need to organize this data into a class interval table. Now, a class interval table is similar to a Italian frequency table in that we're looking for the frequency of the occurrence of items. However, it's slightly different in nature. What we're going to do in it is we're going to group items together and then look at the frequency. Now, to be able to draw one of these tables, what we first need to do is organize a column, and we'll call it class interval student heights. Then I'm going to rule it off. I'm always going to ensure that I'm using a ruler when I'm drawing these tables, so my work is neater to read. If my work is not neat and people can't read it, then there is no point doing it. Now, the second column I'm going to draw is a frequency column. Then I'm going to rule both of these off. Now, the next step is I need to organize these into class intervals, and the interval spacing I'm going to use in this instance is 10 units. Now, to be able to determine the lowest number that we're going to start with, we look for the lowest number within our data set. In this case, by inspection, I can see that the lowest number is 146. So what that means is I'm going to organize my lowest class interval to be between 140 to 150. Now I'm going to look for the highest data point. In this case, simply by inspection, I can see that it is probably 185. It might be a bigger one, but I can't see it yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to count all the way from 140 up to 190. So my last class interval will include 180 to 190. Easy does it. Now, next step is I'm going to make it a little bit easier to work with, and I'm going to color code all of these ranges, all of these intervals. So this one I'll make pink, and I'll go green. Of course, you don't have to do the color coding, but it's going to make it easy when I'm sorting through the data here. So if you have highlighters, I recommend using them. Now, next thing I'm going to do is, in my peach color, I'm going to highlight all of the data points between 140 up to 150. I'm not going to include 150 if I see it in here. Rather, that's going to go in the green column. So if it's 140 all the way up to 150, it's going to go in the frequency here. So, looking for this, nothing in the first row, nothing in the second, or the third, or the fourth, but I do have one data point here. So my frequency for this guy is going to be 1. Alright, next one. We're looking at 150 to 160. So instantly, 150, 158. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 going orange, 160 to 170. So we've got 2, 4, 6, 8 going purple, 170 to 180. We have a grand total of 6. And finally, between 180 and 190, we have a count of 5. Alright, ruling everything off so it's nice and tidy. And thus what we have over here is our class interval table. We're now able to use this table to construct a histogram. Now, the histogram is similar in nature to that of a column graph. However, there's some slight cosmetic differences. The difference being that when we're drawing the bars or the columns on our histogram, with a column graph we had spaces between it. In a histogram we don't. The lack of spaces represent that we're working with continuous data, so the data flows into one another. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the table or the data shown in the table here to construct the histogram shown over here. Now the way in which this is going to work is we're going to have a two-axis. So the first axis is going to be the frequency, and then on the horizontal axis this is going to represent the student heights or the student height class intervals. Let's just go student. Now I need to start labeling my axes. On the vertical axis, what I'm going to do is I'm going to double space it. So what that means is I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, and so on. Basically all I need to do is ensure that my data represented in here is going to be able to be represented in here. Now for the spacing on the horizontal axis, again I just have to make sure I can represent 140 all the way up to 190. So with this I'm going to triple space it so it's easier to read. So I'll start 140 shown here, then I'll count it up and go 150, then finally 190. So I got a little bit of slack at the end, which is okay. If I want I can just shorten that. Alright, next step is I need to draw in my data points. So looking at the first one, for 140 to 150, which is this space here, it's going to be a frequency of 1. So I'll get a ruler and I'll neatly draw between 140 and 150 and space it to 1, like so. Then the next one is 5. So it's going to go 150 to 160 is instantly going to go up to 5. 160 to 170 is 8. This is the biggest. This is our modal class. 170 to 180 is 6. And finally 180 to 190 is 5. Now final step is I need to draw in the bars. Again, I'm going to use a ruler, so my graph is actually neat and legible for people who I'm trying to communicate this information to. There's no point drawing graphs if no one can read them. And thus what we're presented with here is a beautiful histogram. Now the final thing I should do to annotate this is I should give it a title. In this case I'm going to call it student height information. And I'll give the horizontal axis here some units. I'll give it centimeters. It really should have been specified up here. And now the final change that I might want to make to this is I might want to make a cosmetic change in that I'm going to color these graphs or the columns in here so they're easier to read. Now you don't have to do it this way, but the purpose of drawing a graph is to make things easier to read. So what I'll do is I'll just color them in. And then some quick annotations. So no gaps. So there are no gaps between the columns to represent that this is continuous data. And finally, the tallest column is it's what's known as the modal class. So in summary, what we had a look at in this video was how we can represent continuous data graphically. We discovered that we could do this using a histogram. However, to first construct a histogram, we first need to organize our data into something called a class interval table, as shown over here. In this case, our class interval table is spaced by 10 units. Then, after we construct this class interval table, we can then construct our histogram shown over here.